So if money creation for the last 10 years has been running at 7%, 7 into 72 is 10.2. So what that means is that in essence, the value of the dollar has been cut in half in the last 10 years. The dollar purchasing power was double what it's worth today 10 years ago. That's how fast inflation erodes if you're talking 7% money creation. This is why John Williams of Shadow Stats will tell you that no, it's not 3%. It's actually between 8 and 11%. But let's just take the low end of that and say 7%. That would mean 10 years ago, the dollar was cut in half. Gold was at $1,200. It's just over 2,500 now, just under 26. So did gold double or did the dollar fall in half? And you can make that same, you can make that same analogy going all the way back. You can look at this right here, a $20 gold coin and a $20 gold certificate. That's from 1933, an ounce of gold in that $20 gold coin. And if you were to have two boxes that Grandpa left for you, one has 500 of those $20 bills. Now, granted, it's a gold certificate. It's worth more than a $20 bill, but the example is the same. One shoebox filled with $520 bills and one box filled with $520 coins. Same exact value back then. One's worth well over $1 million. One's worth 10,000. One other example, you can even talk about silver. You can take a silver dime and a silver quarter, which right now melt value is about $7, somewhere in that neighborhood, about 20 times its value of 35 cents, right? And so you go back to 1964, a gallon of gas was 35 cents. We took the silver out of the money. That 35 cents doesn't buy you a tenth of a gallon anymore, but that $7 in melt value when real money was in the currency, it now buys you 2 gallons of gas. So the common theme here is that gold and silver are kind of like sitting on the ledge of the bathtub. The water underneath is the value of the dollar. And as you pull the plug on the dollar and it decreases, it's not gold and silver getting higher. It's the value of the currency that we measure it in getting lower.
President Trump, question number 4 coming in hot. President Trump is one of the few people that I know I know his son Eric very well, that seems to be talking about that losing the dollar status as the world's reserve currency would be worse than losing a war. Again, President Trump has said multiple times that losing the dollar status as the world's reserve currency would be worse than losing a war. I would say the average American is probably aware of what a war is. I think we all know that. But I don't think the average American understands that losing the U.S. dollar status as the world's reserve currency would be, in fact, worse than losing a war. Could you explain what that means and maybe why President Trump is one of the few voices in the political sphere talking about that?
Yeah, I was really thrilled to hear him talk that way, as a matter of fact, to recognize it and to understand the exorbitant privilege that we've really enjoyed for. I think gold will probably be allowed to run much further because I really do believe gold will be revalued. I think it will stand behind a new system, whether it be in the BRICS or in the West. Even the head of the IMF, who's big into the development of crypto, central bank digital currencies, Kristalina Georgieva said, if a CBDC is not pegged to something, it's fiat. What other things can you peg it to? And I think they will let gold run. And silver and gold have a 90% correlation throughout all of history. They don't move in unison, but they often have a lag effect. I could see silver running to a level that most people would think is crazy, because it's the first tiny little podunk nowhere bank that is easy to bail in for them, or pay the FDIC insurance. It's a scary thought to me, and it's one that I think people should be aware of. Is it a trial balloon? And if not, why not more, publicity on it? Why not does every YouTuber who is covering the financial space know about it? In fact, most don't, and I don't blame them. Most know it failed, but the lack of coverage has been such that if you don't really dig, you're not going to find it. And I think, to me, that's the red flag. It's the red flag, the lack of disclosure, and something that should freak the hell out of everyone. And that's probably why it hasn't been disclosed. It could indeed, just like the FBI said, well, if the people really knew how bad it was, it would create a run on the banks. There's that leaked video on YouTube also from last year. It's the same thing. It's like, don't broadcast this too much because it will create too much a stir. So yeah, I think it's important to understand that we're far from, and you mentioned their treasuries. Well, what's happened since the last 45, 60 days as the Fed has lowered interest rates on the front end, the back end says, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. You're not going to choose austerity or inflation over austerity. We're not going to take your duration treasuries, which I believe are uninvestable to me. Anyone that would buy a 10-year treasury paying 4.5% when the numbers of inflation that we are given are so far skewed from reality, you're out of your mind. And so, I mean, you can get the same thing right now in a 6-month treasury and not have to have that duration risk, the default risk, all of the other forms of risk that are associated with the treasury market. If you're a foreign investor, certainly weaponization risk. And so I think that, it's interesting that the rates on the back end have gone up even higher than they were lowered on the front end. And that is what the banks own, the 10-year treasury. So their balance sheet just got crappier again. These are problems that are created through years of suppression of interest rates and pissing off Mother Nature. If you mess with interest rates and you create distortions in asset prices and misallocations in resources and in capital, there's no easy way to get back to where you were by yanking all of the liquidity out of the system. It creates a tremendous amount of instability in these banks that for the entire pandemic, we're allowed to maintain a zero reserve requirement. And now because of the Basel III revision of what banks have to maintain, it's 4.5%. So a well-funded bank has 4.5 cents on the dollar. So everyone freaks out, runs to the bank, give me my money. They got 4.5 cents on the dollar. So the banks have to sell those toxic bonds that have lost value again and put the bank in greater jeopardy than they already are, if not collapse the bank.
The border, the immigration, the judicial system, the electoral process, the lawlessness, the valuing lifestyle over merit, all of these crazy things that are contrary to our culture that have been whitewashed over the last 4 years. You can see that President-elect Trump is doing all he can in a very expedient manner, if you will, to address these things. And I give him credit for that. And we should be optimistic for that. Part of the pullback in metals is irrational exuberance. And while it's fair to be happy and exhibit exuberance, much of the behavior is irrational in the respect that financially nothing's changed. The banks are still massively over-leveraged and undercapitalized, and President Trump's agenda will be one of a weaker currency, a loss of purchasing power, and lower interest rates. And this is massively inflationary. And so while he will hopefully get us back on track as a nation and going back to the things that have inspired admiration around the globe forever about this country that we have deviated so far from, it's that type of mentality that has thrown out the baby with the bathwater, that has moved from risk off to risk on. And there's something to say about that too. I mean, you could argue that this Trump trade, if you will, cryptos and stocks and things that the 1%ers own will do very well. But in the end, the inflation that is baked into the cake, the fragility of the banking system that is baked into the cake, and the need to reset this system has not changed. The drive of the BRICS after what the Bank of International Settlements did to them at the 12th hour, which, as we talked about last week, is akin to espionage. It's right out of a James Bond movie. Their impetus for de-dollarization and accumulating commodities has not changed. And so while we should be optimistic, while we should be thankful, while we should be grateful that President Trump will address the ills that have afflicted this country from a social standpoint, from a moral standpoint, from an immigration standpoint, from all of the things that have, I think, troubled most people. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Many of these things, I think, have troubled even moderate Democrats. And we're not talking the far, far left. But this is something where I think going back to our roots, our culture, is the first place to start. Now, as far as fixing the ills of our economy, of our massive, massive debt, the path that he's taken isn't really the best way to go.
All of these things are the reasons why you see the formation of the BRICS and why you have a much lesser appetite for U.S. Treasury debt, which in the long run leads to higher interest rates or monetization of the debt by the Fed, which leads to hyperinflation and higher interest rates. You look at the big picture, and the big picture is that instead of clinging to the privilege of being the world reserve currency, we're doing everything we can to destroy that. And I think that will have negative effects in the debt market, with credit, and with the way that we are viewed across the globe, and also incentivizing these countries to find strength in numbers and to do things that will be outside of the Western purview, trading in local currencies, trading with one another outside the dollar, and looking to things like gold and other commodities as a replacement for the Treasury.